film or series lit your fuse and made you have to tell stories on screen?
I think it was Fanny and Alexander, the Bergman. I know it was TV originally, but the way we saw it in Mexico was as a movie, which is, I think, the same way that it played in the US back in the day. This was like 1984, and my mother had died recently. And my mother loved horror, but she wouldn't let me and my sister watch horror. My father came to me and my sister and said, you know the bad news, guys. You know what happened. The good news is we have a new administration in the company, so anything that you didn't like in the past management, we can change. And I said immediately, I want to watch horror movies and grow my hair. Those were my two. So he said, what do you want to watch? And I said, I want to watch The Shining and Alien. And he said, okay, fine. This is what we're going to do. You get to watch those movies if I tell you everything that happens in them and you still want to watch them. And you watch a movie that I pick. And I was like, fine. So his movie was Fanny and Alexander, and my movies were The Shining and Alien. And he reenacted Alien and The Shining for us so well that when I saw it, I felt that I had already seen it. And it was very smart because then the shocks are not shocks. You know what's coming, you know? And I love those movies so deeply. But then I had to see the movie that my dad had picked for me, and it was super long and it was Swedish. But I sat down. This movie is not appropriate for an 8-year-old anyways either, you know? But it shook me to my core to see these two children who lose their father and their lives change, and they realize that you're never done with the dead. You know, they keep walking with you wherever you go. And both the family mechanics and the strange Scandinavian magical realism of an antiquarian with a room where there's an angel trapped. And this ghost walking with the characters forever stayed with me, and I felt that I could at least try to tell stories like that. And here we are.
Wow. Well, so now as you were finding your way as a filmmaker, was there a movie or a series that came along and you watched it and it was so good it made you question if you could ever rise to that level or if you belonged in playing in this sandbox?
Oh, well, I mean, this is going back to when I was making up my mind about all of this. Wings of Desire of Wim Wenders was a massive thing back then. And I just could not believe that what I was watching was a movie. You know, it felt... It apparently didn't have a storyline. It did. In the end, there's a love story, but so much of the movie is just the human experience and a removed witness watching the human experience and the poetry of it all. It just blew me away. I couldn't understand how a person could summon that amount of beautiful images and beautiful music and beautiful poetry and performances and make a movie where nothing happens but absolutely everything happens. To this day, I don't know if I can make that movie, you know, but you move on and you carry them, and then eventually they come out in little ways.
Well, now, maybe it was a success of your work or approval from someone whose opinion really mattered to you. But what first gave you the confidence that in fact you should be doing this, that you could move people in the ways that you just had mentioned?
Well, after my mother died, you know, I didn't feel part of the world of the other kids around me in a school. And so I would submerge myself. I would love to submerge myself in movies, but we were so broke that we couldn't own a VCR. It took us a really long time to get together the money. So in the meantime, what I could do was read. So I started reading like crazy, and I would hide my books, which were, you know, everything from Sherlock Holmes to Edgar Allan Poe to Lovecraft in my school books, and start reading them in class secretly. but I would get caught, and the teachers would take the books and they would never give them back. And again, we were broke, so that was tragic. So the solution I found was to pretend that I was taking notes in class. I was a terrible student, not good grades, as you can imagine, after all of that. And instead of taking notes, I started writing my own stories to not be in the real world. So writing came as a way of survival when I was very young. I didn't feel that I needed to learn to write. I knew that I was a storyteller. However, I developed an enormous passion for archaeology because I had seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, another formative movie, and I could not understand the beauty of living that life. So I went into archaeology and I very quickly understood that I was not going to become Indiana Jones, and that's not what archaeology is. So if that was not it, and I could not be Indiana Jones, maybe I could make Indiana Jones. I was already writing. I loved movies, but I didn't know if I could acquire mastery of the grammatics of it. I immediately came home and told my father, I'm not going to be an archaeologist. And he was like, oh my God, we've lived 12 years for you preparing for archaeology, and now you come up with this. What do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a filmmaker. And at that time, 8 movies a year were made in Mexico. So it didn't look good. So we took the yellow pages, opened them, found the telephone number of one of the only 2 film schools in Mexico. This one is part of the National University. It's the film school where Cuarón and Chivo attended. And we just asked, what do you need to do to come into that school? They were very selective. It was very small and free because it was a national university, thank God. I applied, and it was a very tough process of selection, but I got in. I was one of 15 students that year, and the rest is history.
Wow. And so did somebody, maybe it was a teacher, for me, becoming a writer, someone called me out in class and said, this is as close to professional writing as I've seen in one of my classes. Was there somebody in particular who reinforced that you were really good?
Well, my father, he was kind of biased, but also he had really good taste. And he was tough, and when I started writing, he would give me endless notes and I would throw it at him. And I still react like that to notes, I have to say. But I would eventually think about it, go back, try again. And he was a tough teacher, and eventually it started to become better. And then in high school, I had been kicked out of 8 schools. I ended up being in 10 schools during my childhood. It was difficult, to put it mildly. At this time, I was in a Catholic school because even though I was an atheist, a young atheist, the only school that would take me was a Catholic school in hopes of converting me and saving me, which didn't work. But they have a contest, all the Catholic schools, of someone writing a short story about a saint, which is not my subject matter. But you can take any subject matter, is my philosophy. So I took a story of a young high school student that dies and has a revelation, and I won the award for best writer, and I started taking it seriously. And then after that, I just started writing a lot of short stories, and a lot of them got awards, and some of them got published in Mexico. And I started to feel that I could actually do this. In the way that the young are amazing because they don't know the challenges, so you're fearless, and that you don't know the rules, so you just break them, you just go for it, and without noticing, you develop a style. I think starting later in life is so much harder because everything is real and terrifying, and you realize the challenges. When you're a kid, the world is yours, so I went for it.
Oh, well, so now, what would you say was the biggest obstacle that you had to overcome to allow you to turn the projects that influenced you into your own language as a writer and director?
I think this is something that happens to a lot of people. You have a first feature, and you want to put everything in it. Like, you want to make it like so many movies, and you want to so many cool things to happen in it. And so I had four main characters, and it was a love story, but it was a comedy, but it was also a surreal moment, and it had magic, and it had music, and it had, so the movie is fun, but it's too many things. I think that the love that I felt for movies and literature was a problem in the beginning, and slowly, as you mature as an artist, you can shake those and be clearer and cleaner in the story you're telling, and only letting the influence that at the time needs to come to peak. That's the goal. I'm still incredibly baroque and incredibly ambitious, and my justification for all of that is I'm Mexican, so the way we cook and our architecture is about adding, and I'm still trying to acquire some zen. So that's my exercise as a filmmaker, to do at some point something that is a very, very, very minimal storyline. It's just not who I am.
Now, my last question. I can still remember when I saw the first True Detective. I mean, I could tell television was changed, and you could peel these characters like an onion, and people would follow, and it changed things for actors. It made for richer performances. It is quite a high bar they created there. Tell me, and now you've got Jodie Foster, you've got this incredible venue, which is really interesting to look at and logistically complicated. Tell me what most burned in you to do this.
Well, something happened with that first True Detective, right? That in the middle of all the noise and all the options and all the TV and all the movies, this thing created an impact, and people stopped and watched. And not only that, for me, the true testament to something that is unique is the fact that it stayed with people. It's been 10 years since that came out, and people remember it, and people crave it. So, me, myself, as an audience, I was like, I want it to come back. I want that emotion and that feeling of that first season. I want to experience it again. So when HBO came to me and Nick was no longer involved, and they asked, what would you do with True Detective? Oh my God, I stopped in my tracks, and I had ideas. Because we all do this. We watch something and we go like, oh, they should do this. And if they had asked me, I would, but now they asked me. So I sat down and I was like, what was it that hit me so hard about that? Me and everyone, about that first series. And it was a world, this Southern Gothic, where two very different men with two very different views of the world are trying to talk amongst themselves of the very two different worlds where they live. They inhabit different worlds, but behind them this bayou full of secrets and dark and sinister old gods. And I thought, I want to see that again. So what could feel as full of secrets and creatures and stories and whispers, like the Bayou. So unique, and still a piece of Americana, but it's still like a discovery, still like a character. Alaska came to me, and the darkness, and the ice, because nothing better than darkness and ice to hold secrets, And then I thought, what would happen if it's two women, and they are also carrying long pasts with twists and turns, and they're carrying their own ghosts, and they both walk in a world where things may be exactly what they seem, or they may be something behind, and keeping those elements of what really worked of that for me, of that first season, but then being free to change everything else was an experiment. Obviously, it's nerve-wracking, you're messing with something that is beloved. But I think we all miss it. Why not try to see it again?
Best thing about working with Jodie?
It's impossible to say one thing. That woman is a dream, and I don't want to work with anybody else ever again. She's the best actor of her generation, and I will, with a couple of mezcals in me, say she's the best actor alive. The things that I saw her doing on set, in camera, and after months and months of editing her, you still discover other things that she's doing. She works at so many levels, and the effortlessness, especially the effortlessness. She just glides into it. It's such a gracious talent. But on top of that, she is an incredible collaborator. She's a filmmaker herself. She has worked with the best directors in the world. And she's incredibly generous and easy. So she will come to set from the scripts. She would say, maybe this could happen. And that, instead of being, sometimes you work with actors that are dealing with ego things and they want to see themselves in a really cool way. That's not where she comes from. Her entire thing is, how can the show be better? How can the movie be better? So she would come with ideas that would immediately ignite me. And I would take them and rewrite around them. And we would work together in that. And then on set, it was the same. Scenes that we had rehearsed, scenes that we had discussed, we would stand there, look at each other and go like, nah. And we would create it again. And we would love that process. So it was one of the best collaborations, if not the best, I've ever had in my career.